Welcome to the County Conversations Podcast, brought to you by the Florida Association of Counties Institute for County Government with support from the University of Florida's IFAS. In this podcast, we dive deep into the diverse and dynamic world of Florida's counties with engaging interviews and thought-provoking conversations surrounding the challenges as well as successes of Florida's counties. Each episode brings you firsthand perspectives from county commissioners, government officials, community leaders, and subject matter experts who are shaping the future of our state. We explore a wide range of topics from economic development and public safety to environmental conservation and emerging technologies. Our aim here is to provide a platform for knowledge sharing, collaboration, and inspiration for county officials and residents alike. Whether you're a county commissioner, government professional, or simply interested in understanding the local government landscape, we hope this podcast provides valuable insights and practical takeaways on all things counties.
Chris, thank you for joining us today in Studio 67. I hope we can have a frank discussion about the administrative side of government. We were talking earlier, and I mentioned that on some of the earlier podcasts, we had nice conversations with current and past commissioners about their work as community leaders and importantly, their relationships with county staff, something I think is critical for a county to run effectively. But today I want to flip the script a little and talk about running a county from the management side. I think you're well suited for this topic. Your work in county government spans nearly 30 years, and in that time you held a variety of positions, including serving as county administrator in two different counties, one of those a coastal county in the Panhandle that has certainly seen its share of hurricanes and major destructions that you were a part of. But before we talk about managing local disasters, and I do want to talk at length about that, but first I want to discuss something slightly different. And that is, I want to get your perspective on whether you think working as a county manager is a relatively stable career to pursue. And what I mean by that, and this is just my view, is historically speaking, the job tenure of a county manager can be short-lived. All it takes is, one election cycle, and a new board can decide it's going in a different direction and look for a new manager to lead the county. And so the relative stability of these positions may be a little shaky and actually deter very capable individuals from applying, many who really ought to apply. So that's a big intro, Chris. So give me your thoughts on this. Is the turnover rate for county managers today as high as it was in the past, or am I misreading this?
I think that's changing, Eric. I think when I was coming up, if you were wanting to achieve a certain level in a profession, whether that's the size of a community or making enough to support a family and all that kind of stuff, then you had to move. And Lori and I added up the moves. Over a dozen times we moved for me to go to work. I think today good jobs are hard to find, and in stable politics is hard to find if it exists. And so you find the Vince Longs and others that once they're in Vince could have gone anywhere he wanted to nationally. But, Tallahassee, Leon County is a good job. It pays well. He built a good staff. And once you've got a good team built, you weigh the options of going and having to do it again. Because if you go into a situation where they've hired somebody, then they probably fired somebody. Or, it may have been somebody retired and left a good team in place. If they retired and they were a good manager, then they left a deputy prepared to take over. And most of the time, and I think that for a manager is one of the top priorities, is to build a good team and to plan for the change when it comes, and to have someone. The good Lord only knows what tomorrow brings, and I tell managers that you may think you're going to be there forever, and tomorrow you can have something happen to you that takes you out of office, and if you haven't trained and prepared your second in commands to take over, then you're doing a disservice to the community you work for. So it is a top priority.
And did Roger do that? And
Roger had 2 deputies. Yep, Dave Harner was one of his deputies. Glenn Sayer, another one. Mr. Harner is now the manager, doing a good job. So yes, Roger certainly prepared, and it was a very smooth transition. Roger didn't give him a lot of notice. He said, "I'm ready to go," and within a few weeks, they made the transition. And
one hurricane too many. You think that was part of it?
From a guy that's been through a few of them, it takes a lot out of you. And Roger will say it wasn't the storm. He just, everybody has an internal clock about when it's time to either change jobs or to retire or whatever you want to call it, do something different. I think Roger was just ready. The hurricane took a lot out of him. Of course, since I was working Ground Zero, Fort Myers Beach, selfishly, I say the only 2 communities that really got hit by that storm were Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach. You literally got a half a mile inland into Fort Myers or unincorporated Lee County. You wouldn't even know there was a storm. It was a 18-foot storm surge that washed over those 2 barrier islands and pretty much flattened whatever was in its way, other than recently built homes and condominiums.
So how did if the county is responsible for emergency management countywide, and the 2 hardest hit areas were incorporated cities, how did they work to recover?
You know better than anyone, the structure of how it works. And of course, the county is emergency management. And so each of those communities had designated staff that went to the EOC and worked in the EOC. And, DEM obviously came down and were just godsends for those 2 communities. Mr. Guthrie, Director Guthrie's, was there pretty much every week for the first 6 months almost. We had weekly meetings. I didn't start there until the middle of November. The storm was at the end of September. And literally the town hall was gone. So we were operating out of DEM trailers. And they're still in trailers, I believe, being paid for by DEM. Here we're over a year later. But county still ran the EOC. We still all went there. I felt the communications was relatively good. But I don't think human nature is, you want to turn the page after a disaster, you kind of want to move on to the next. You've got other issues to deal with. So those that weren't affected, move on. The ones that were affected can't move on. Those 2 communities will be dealing with Ian recovery for 5 years, 10 years. I still obviously have a house in Gulf County and interact with Gulf County. It's 5 years since Hurricane Michael. The meetings we've had this week have all pretty much been about storm-related grant programs, hazard mitigation programs, CDBG-DR programs. These are all programs that provide resources for communities to rebuild after storm. So we're over 5 years after Michael, and we're still rebuilding and doing things in Gulf County, and will for another 4 or 5 years.
So how much of the residential areas are rebuilt?
When you drive along Highway 98, in Gulf County, outside of Port St. Joe, or even in the urban area along the historical Reed Avenue area of Port St. Joe, I would say residentially, of all the old homes built mostly by St. Joe executives that were along 98, along the bay, that all of them were old 1960s type houses, and pretty much all of them were gone, and probably a block deep that probably 70% of that's been rebuilt. There's still plenty of vacant lots that are on the market that are being rebuilt, and the homes that are going in are on stilts and modern construction and will stand, hopefully, storms that come in the future. But there's still a lot of rebuilding there. St. Joe Beach, Mexico Beach, if you drive through there, I'd be guessing, but it seems about the same. They're over 50%, maybe 60, 70, but there's still plenty of vacant property being redeveloped.
Are outside developers coming in and taking advantage of?
Absolutely. So there's a whole wave that shows up after a storm. It happened here after Michael. It happened when I was in Okaloosa after Opal and Aaron and Ivan. It does kickstart both the redevelopment and the development side of things. It's unwanted marketing that you get when you're flashed on national news and it shows, and there's a whole wave of people, from debris clearing people, demolition people, mold removers. I mean, there's just an army of contractors that show up and literally knock on doors. And there's an army of real estate speculators that knock on doors and claim they've got, a suitcase full of cash, and what will you take for your property? And there are people that want out. The emotional drain on the residents after a storm is severe. The emotional drain on the staff is severe. I told Michael Hammond, the manager in golf, I just was in golf. I had to run up, was staying with my mother in St. Pete, and I had to run up to prepare my house. And then as it built, we thought it was going to be just a cat one, wasn't a big deal, wasn't coming, and then you get Rick Scott on TV saying, this thing's going to be a whopper and y'all got to get the heck out. Now, I evacuated to 3 different spots to get out of the way and ended up at the county EOC. And my advice to Michael Hammond after the storm was, don't let this thing literally kill you physically, emotionally. So you take care of yourself. You got to continue to eat right, get rest, because this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're going to be doing this for a long time. And so,
was the EOC damaged?
The EOC, both the admin offices for golf and the EOC were built to wind loads that could handled it. Good. Now, inside we weren't in the actual EOC. We were in the admin office, where they're right next to each other, and the ceiling fans were spinning by themselves. The ceiling tiles were flopping. The walls were literally kind of moving in and out. The windows were breathing. And we, at one point, the manager wanted to try to get everybody, and there were probably 30 or 40 people in there, that commissioners and families and things like that. He wanted to try to move us to the jail, because the jail was all concrete. And we rebelled. We were not going to go out in a Cat 5 storm. And there were some people that were worried enough that got under desks and tables. If you felt threatened, there was a way we could put you in an interior room under something. The library right next door, the roof came off of that. There was a lot. There was a lot to that. And these buildings were all probably 10 blocks off the bay, and when we tried to go out, there were probably 6 or 8 people that feared for their life, that were caught in buildings downtown, that the water came up and they went up and the roof came off, and they had to find refuge somewhere in between. And so we had to get out to try to get people out of harm's way, and there was still 6 to 8 foot of surge 6 blocks inland an hour after the storm. It doesn't just recede instantly. It takes hours. We were the first over the bridge there on the canal, trying to get over to St. Joe Beach. Obviously, the further west you went, the worse it got towards Mexico, which was supposedly Mexico Beach, where the landfall was. Anyway, you can imagine all the power lines down. You're not sure, probably the smartest thing power companies do these days. When I was at Okaloosa, they tried to keep the grid up and keep power on. They just shut it all off.
Because of the danger of the hot lines.
Yeah, we are. So why risk that? So
I've heard generators can create a reverse issue. Have you heard this?
Mm-mm.
So you got the lines that are down, someone hooks up their generator and it energizes the lines going the other way.
Oh, outside of their house?
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that one.
So going back to Fort Myers Beach, you got there in November, so it's about 6 weeks after?
Mm-hmm. September 28th, and I started November 15th.
So what are the first things that you were hired as a interim city manager. So the first 2 months, what are the priorities that you focused on?
Well, I'll say there's probably 3 key areas, and I'll go back to what I said before about managers' responsibilities. The town, and this is getting a little technical, it was what they call city light. So in Southwest Florida, communities like Bonita, Springs, Fort Myers Beach, maybe Sanibel to a certain extent, prided themselves in contracting a lot of the core administrative functions of the town. So you're building, so one of the key departments, obviously, after a hurricane is your building department, whether it's building inspections for safety, whether it's, fire inspection, whatever it is. And then, of course, rebuilding, issuing building permits and all that is key. And this town was one of these towns that had contracted out a lot of these services. And it doesn't work well in a disaster. Some of your contractors don't show up for work, or don't want the job anymore because they know what's coming. And the contract they had was structured around just normal day-to-day operations, not a disaster like this. And so we had vacancies so the 3 departments I focused on, finance department. So can you financially survive the storm? What's going to happen to your revenue stream? The 2 communities that I mentioned, Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach, both suffered. In Fort Myers Beach, it's about 42% of their ad valorem base, which is what taxes are based on, was wiped out. 38%, I believe, somewhere in that range for Sanibel. And so you've got 2 communities with almost half their valuation gone. And the legislature, I'm not saying it was right or wrong, offered a refund to people who had already paid their taxes for the 3 months, October, November, December. And so financially, can you make payroll? Can you pay your bills? And there was no finance director there.
Why? They contracted that out as well, or?
Well, we'll probably, there's reasons that the manager that was there when the hurricane hit did not last very long after the storm. So I'm probably getting too in the weeds here, but the storm hits on the 28th. The first week in November, there's an election. There's 2 new council members for that town. The first meeting of the town council, they let the manager go. So the first week in November, they have no manager. And again, back to the emotional strain. So I can't exactly remember on the finance director. I think there had been one, and she had left, and then there was an interim one, and she got ill, and there was literally nobody there. So Mr. Guthrie, back to Director Guthrie, helped bring in finance staff from Jacksonville, I believe. He brought in probably a dozen or more code and building inspectors and permit technicians so that we could gear up that whole function and get out and provide services to them. The Public Works Department was leaderless. That's another very important function of the town in terms of water and sewer systems and roads and things like that. So my immediate job was to assess staff, fill gaps as fast as I could, whether it's through the help from the state or through contract people that I knew that could just come in and sit and get, run a department for a few weeks till we could post it. There was no HR director. And you've got all these vacancies. Your manager's position's vacant. All these department heads are vacant. How do you recruit and hire in that environment? He helped, Mr. Guthrie helped provide an HR professional that happened to live in Cape Coral. She was great, came in and helped fill a bunch of these spots. So focus on financing, focus on staff, and then focus on just the disaster and the task at hand to just, make the day-to-day. We had a huge debris challenge, huge, more than I've ever seen in my 50 years of local government work. And so,
did they have enough pre-designated spots for debris?
It would be complicated for me to try to explain the debris situation, and that's one thing I told Director Guthrie and kind of debrief on what I saw, pros and cons of how it all worked. Thank God the state came in and took over debris clearing for anybody that wanted their structure taken down. There was grants to do that. And then we had a debris contractor that we used on city streets, but the material had to be brought to the right-of-way to get it. And there was a lot of midnight clearing going on that was not permitted and that we didn't know about. And it's very dangerous for somebody to show up on a lot. People don't understand that if there was gas service to that lot, there's risk for explosions when you start grading a lot off. Has the water and sewer system been capped, or else you take it off and water starts shooting in the air. So the average resident doesn't understand you can't just go in there with a bulldozer and scrape it down and move it and we had a lot of that, unfortunately, going on. There's so much money involved in debris clearing, and the contractors that know that are very competitive and very aggressive when they go into, and it's a disaster zone. These trucks, literally, these drivers sleep in their trucks. I mean, they haul all day, all night. When they get tired, they stop and they sleep, and they get up and they go at it again because they're being paid on the load. Mm-hmm. And it is nonstop, and it's a huge challenge for local government to manage it as best you can.
On the demolition of the house, I remember Kevin Guthrie talking about this in a committee meeting about the different, you need an inspection for this and you need a permit, but was that ever streamlined at the city level?
We had to refocus our priorities several times out of the building department. So when I got there, within a week or so, we had this big powwow with debris clearing, with the state program for providing grant funds to clear the house had just kind of hit. And we refocused on, we had a backlog at one point of some 70 or 80 permits for demo permits. And we were cranking on just residents quickly want to know what they can do. They have to assess their property as to whether it's 50% plus one damaged and they can rebuild it. If it's more than 51%, they have to take it down and build it to code. If it's less than that, they can get a building permit and start repairing it. You know what happens. Everyone comes in with their brother-in-law or whoever else with their toolbox, and they start working on their house.
My dad did.
It's human nature. Okay, I did after Michael. I don't know what takes a building permit. I wasn't gonna. So you just do what you can do up to a certain point. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not capable of doing everything. So we were focused on helping the residents assess and get permits to start working on their house so they could get back in their house. We had to shift to the debris side and issue permits quickly for all the residents that wanted their structures, because it's unsafe to leave these structures piled up. Believe it or not, you have vagrants and homeless people that just kind of take up residents. It's a challenge. So we had to refocus 2 or 3 times out of the building department on what was important.
But the homeowners, at least that were there locally, got a set of rules like, all right, you and your cousin can't just start tearing the house down. There's safety issues. Was that kind of presented to them in a document?
Yeah, so here's another big challenge for you is how do you communicate to the residents? And I'm not a big technology person. Of course, I came up, before websites existed and all this other stuff, social media and everything. But I will say that social media and the internet was how residents there really learned. There's a Beach Talk Radio family there, husband and wife, that do daily shows, and the council members that were there used that a lot to communicate what was going on. They were going on their shows almost daily. I went on the shows. We had some town hall meetings. We didn't have a town hall, but we tried to have some community meetings. I mean, it goes on and on. You know, the food truck situation, you get a lot of food trucks. Where are they permitted? Are you just going to, if somebody had a restaurant, can they just park a food truck and go? There are a whole separate set of health regulations around food trucks and everything. It goes on and on. You know, every day's a challenge, and all you can do is just go in and give it your best and try to go home and get some rest and come back. You know, I got real fortunate because the day I went down there where I thought I was just going to talk to the council about some opportunities or options for them in terms of managing, didn't realize that they voted that day to hire my partner and I, Keith Wilkins, who had worked for me in Pensacola. I had to find a place to stay. And that Beach Talk Radio show, the guy said, hey, we just hired a manager. He didn't have any place to stay. Within an hour, I got a call from somebody up in the Midwest that had a house there that was habitable, that he offered at a somewhat reasonable rate. And so I literally in one day went down there and stayed on and off for 6 months.
The house was in the county, obviously, or
no, it was on Fort Myers Beach.
Oh.
It was a new construction, and the lower floors there, were damaged, but the habitable space on the second floor, and he got power hooked up and water and sewer, and it was a nice house. It was only a year or two old. I mean, it really wasn't that old, and there were 4 houses built by the same contractor, by the same guy,
and they all stood.
And they all stood. And they all were
That's
habitable.
probably, I saw some aerials where they showed these nice houses.
But Fort Myers Beach, the hard part, or the good and the bad. So Fort Myers Beach, and of course I worked in Collier for 10 years, so I somewhat knew the area. And Fort Myers Beach prided itself on being that old Florida coastal, a lot of wood structures on grade, old stuff, but it was quaint. All that's gone, or most of it.
Well, kind of like Mexico Beach. I mean, maybe they had cinder blocks.
It was older than
that.
Mexico Beach. I mean, it was and much bigger area. I mean, Fort Myers Beach, I think 6-7 miles long. Estero Island, and Sanibel. Sanibel Bridge, the bridge washed out, so they didn't even allow people on the island for a couple of months. I think till after the first of the year. And so, and again, kudos to FDOT that showed up and got that bridge capable of handling at least emergency traffic, I think, within a couple of weeks, because they were having to use barges to take equipment and supplies out to Sanibel. Anyway.
You could write a book.
Nah.
You haven't written anything down. So hold on. You went through Aaron and Opal. I remember that was 94, 95. Those were back to back. Alberto. Did you guys get flooding from Tropical Storm Alberto?
That one I don't remember the name. Now,
a little bit further inland.
There was that period of time, and it went right up until I started here at FAC, because I got here in 2005. And I remember one of our first trips was out to the EOC because whether that was Ivan or something after, I can't remember what it was, had hit Pensacola, I think, or something like that. So that period of time, there were a lot of storms. It seemed like there was a wave.
But you've had I'm talking about direct management. So you did Aaron and Opal, and then
Ivan affected
indirectly by Michael, because you were just having to live there. And then
I've lost track.
But
there's probably close to 20 storms that, there were 2 or 3 when I was at City of Naples. I remember this storm knocked the pier down in Naples, and I tell people down there, I rebuilt that pier twice, and they've rebuilt it twice since then, and now they're going to and this is the funny thing. I told them, this is back in the mid-'90s. I said, I know they like that old wooden piling pier. It won't hold up. And if you replace it with what you had, it's going to go down again. We had to rebuild the pier, the Okaloosa Island Pier in Okaloosa County, and we did it with FEMA money and help and built it back to, and that pier has stood Michael and other storms, but it's built solid as a rock. And they're now going to build the Naples Pier back like the one in Okaloosa. So it will be there after a storm.
I mean, at some point, FEMA's going to say, we're not paying for that anymore. They do that with roads. But you didn't Like you just said, you focused on three things: finance, staff, and then kind of the daily recovery. I mean, those are kind of the big picture things. You should have write some of these things down as best practices for other county managers.
I tried to get out. I did a webinar podcast. I'm not sure I know the difference, but with the league last year. I went to the managers roundtable several years, missed the one today. Of course, we had Director Guthrie at it last time, and I thought we covered a lot of ground. It's funny, you sit in the room with 20 or 30 managers, and I can look in their face and say, it's never going to happen to me. They sit there and go, I'm too worried about building roads, or I'm too worried about whatever the problem du jour is. And, when you tell them it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, it's going to happen. And if you're not prepared for it, but I could look in the room and say they most of them weren't really focused on a hurricane. Obviously, if they live in the internal or work in the internal part of the state, they think they're immune from it. But Nicole and Aaron both swiped the state. There was as much coastal damage when you've seen the videos of Daytona Beach and St. Volusia and some of these other communities. They got hit hard.
And that was a little storm.
And by the time I got there, it wasn't that bad. So, and when I was a manager, I felt the same way. I just don't have time to, but I've done the best I can. And there were two or three, we talked about debris. So the state taking over debris is huge. They need to keep doing that. These people, the procurement in Fort Myers Beach they thought they were okay, but they had not followed that, what is it, CFR 200, the
something.
FEMA. And if you don't procure, you won't get reimbursed. And so we had to pause and distribute solicitations to procure properly to get reimbursed from FEMA. Huge effort to do everything we'd done.
But did DEM advise you on that? Hey, this is not.
We had somebody from DEM help us, the lady that came down from Jacksonville that looked at all of our procurements and told us which ones, basically everything had to be redone as quickly as possible. And, you have to engage a disaster recovery company. And obviously that has to be procured properly. We had to redo that a couple of times. Anyway, I won't go into it. There's just a lot there. So trying to provide whatever experience that I've had or that other folks have, there's a cycle where when someone gets hit by a storm, I've been called lately about, trying to find somebody to do. Somebody wanted to find somebody that would go to a NACO meeting and talk on a national basis about hurricane recovery and what happened. But there are a number of other managers in Florida that are just as knowledgeable about disaster recovery as I am. Unfortunately, some of them don't take the time to network with their peers and attend meetings and go on panels. I went to the resiliency conference that was put on in Clearwater Beach 4 or 5 months ago. Was on a panel there, as DEM was as well. So I've done the best I can to go share lessons learned from the storm. Every storm's different. Every community's different. There's wind damage. There's storm surge damage. There's both. Every storm's different. So.
Okay, let's change gears for a minute. Today we're talking in 2024. And Chris, you've been around local government for quite a long time. Not too long, but a long time. And can you talk about some of the changes you've seen in county government over the years? Whether counties face different challenges than they did in the past, some of the new technologies that are there, which is an obvious one, even changes in attitudes. And what I'm referring to are attitudes of county commission boards and even the public they serve.
The cycles have come and gone a little bit. I think everybody realizes that the the community exchange of ideas and information, the demeanor has gotten harsher or more difficult or more in your face, I guess is kind of the way to put it. So, in way back, well before me, elected officials were, the bank presidents and the, people that did it to serve. There was a level of respect for those folks, and you had community meetings, and you had differences of opinion. We always have. That's what America's based on. But I think the citizens have gotten higher expectations, whatever you want to call it, that tougher, on elected. So an elected position, I tell electeds, thank you for your service. It's hard work. They get paid very little. In cities, very small. I mean, the Gulf commissioners, we were having this conversation. We were speaking to Senator Simon. He gets a whopping salary of $30,000 as a state senator. And the two commissioners that were sitting in the room from Gulf County make about the same thing. And that's built on the history that these are part-time. Mm-hmm. The bank president works all day. He goes to a council meeting at night and votes on what needs to be voted on, and he goes back home, and that's all he has to do. It's a full-time job for these elected officials. It's hard for them to keep a full-time job and do their elected office too. There's meetings all day, seems like every day, citizen meetings, things like that, Chamber of Commerce meetings, whatever you want to call it. And so the demands on the job for elected official, the demeanor of the exchange between citizens and electeds has gotten tougher. I think most of the challenges are the same. We're fortunate in Florida, for the most part. Obviously, the biggest challenge for local government is how to maintain a quality of life and be able to pay for it. Quality of life is expensive. You have some communities that do as close to nothing as possible because they're at the 10 mil cap and they don't have any money. They can't pave roads. They can't build water and sewer systems. They can't build a basketball court. They can't do anything like that. I haven't mentioned Apalachicola. I spent 6 months, as the interim.
I wrote that down.
Manager in Apalachicola. After Hurricane Michael, same situation, very challenged financially. But for Florida, in general, because it is Florida, our property values trend up. And that means our revenues trend up. Now, all that being said, and I don't want to poke the bear, we have our friends in the legislature, Florida legislature up the street, that in my time when I began, really didn't, I don't say they didn't care, they didn't focus on local government. They had state issues to deal with. In the last 20 plus years, they seem to take a particular interest in managing local government for us. And so that's a huge challenge. And we don't need to go into my first few years here at FAC, and that was after the big run up of all the property values in the heyday of the early 2000s, where values were jumping 15, 20% a year. As a manager, when I was managing, we didn't go to what's called the rollback rate, which you don't get any new money, but we certainly gave the residents back whatever we could. But we also knew that this wouldn't last forever, and we invested as much as we could into road paving, into community centers, into civic centers, into whatever the community felt they wanted. So the financial pluses for Florida is that generally values go up, which means generally you have a little extra money each year. Challenges are the demeanor. Challenges are the state preempting us on a lot, and their focus on our revenue streams. And, the joke around here that we came back from the national conference with about restoring the partnership between state and local government is true as it can be. And I won't mention who the Speaker of the House was when I wore my badge in and put one on his desk and asked him to wear it. And he was a friend and a good guy, but I think they go off to the Republican school of how to do things and come back with focus on your locals. They're doing some crazy things, and you can get brownie points by stopping some crazy stuff. It's my own personal opinion.
I might edit that out.
Okay. That's fine. I've told them that to some of them to their face. I mean, it should be and is a partnership. And there are certainly a majority of the time, some of these bad bills, they don't get anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, this time of year is not a good time. You don't sleep at night because there's 100 bills that are going to make life miserable for local government. The good thing is, hopefully most of them don't pass, because in the end, somebody kind of says, maybe this isn't a good idea. But it is a big challenge for us. A lot else has changed. I think the profession has gotten more professional. I know part of my focus when I was involved as in leadership at the Florida City County Managers Association was the responsibility of managers to build the next generation of managers. And I do see a lot of bright young people that are willing to get involved in local government and step in. My son, for one of them, I never encouraged him to be involved in local government, but he was certainly around it all his life, and went to work at the county and got once you sink your teeth into the great thing about public service, elected level, appointed level, is you feel good about what you do. Now, I guess when you sell a car, you go home at night and you feel good. I'm not poking at car salesmen at all. I don't mean to. But when you are in public service, then you're giving back. Yes, you're making a living, but you feel hopefully you feel an accomplishment for whatever you do. Mm-hmm. Parks and Rec, I spent 7 years as a Parks and Rec director. Loved it, helping kids, doing after school programs, just, Easter egg hunts, the fun stuff, concerts in the park, how can you not feel good about, helping people enjoy quality, overused term, the quality of life of that community. And I think a manager is responsible for trying to elevate that quality of life. Whatever it is, stormwater. People like to have stormwater in their home, so you got to make sure it goes someplace else. Garbage, right? Somebody's got to pick up the garbage. In Suwannee County, when I worked there, you had to take your garbage put it in your car and take it to the dump. Those are some smelly drives with your garbage in the back of your car going to the.
They didn't have garbage pickup?
No. Rural counties.
What year was that?
Rural counties, 91 to 93.
Okay.
In Suwannee.
Well, maybe they have garbage.
Love Live Oak. Live Oak's a great place. Great people. Lori and I had 2 small children when we moved there, and I moved from Naples to Live Oak. Now, that's a cultural shift.
It is.
Big time.
But it was
my first manager job.
Yeah.
So from a department head to my first manager job. And I had, that was the way you had to do it. You had to kind of start in a small organization. And like I said, it was great experience for me there, but it was very difficult.
You felt you were prepped? You were ready?
No, I didn't. I don't want to, long story, but I went to the FCCMA Managers Conference. I'm a golfer, and I played in the golf tournament, and a guy named Jim Cook was the range rider for the Panhandle of Florida, and he was helping Okaloosa hire their first manager. They'd gone through some very embarrassing situations where EMS folks were misbehaving, and it was embarrassing, and they realized that they needed some professional to come in and manage the day-to-day operations. You just couldn't do it. Once an organization gets so big, or a community gets so big, you have to have a professional do this. This is not easy work. And somebody just doesn't walk off the street, and try to do it. Anyway, so Jim convinced me. I was born in Crestview. My dad was stationed at Eglin Air Force Base. My mother's family goes back to the mid-1800s in Okaloosa, in Crestview. And I felt a calling. I said, well, Jim, if you think I've only got now I'd been involved in local government for 15 years already at that point, but
We're still talking about Suwannee County.
I was in Suwannee at the time when I went to the conference.
So no,
Jim talked me into applying for Okaloosa. We're talking about Okaloosa hiring their first manager.
right. But were you prepared when you went to Suwannee? Did you feel you were prepared?
The Parks and Rec department that I ran had a budget probably twice the size of Suwannee's, probably twice the staffing. So in terms of managing resources and people, yes. I was 35 plus or minus. When you asked me if I felt I was ready, I remember my father asking me the question, "Are you capable of doing this job?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." But I wasn't cocky like, hell yeah, your first job. And rural counties don't understand county government or city government a lot. And they don't, nobody likes to pay bureaucrats anything. Nobody thinks they're worth a darn. It's a challenge, especially in rural areas. Urban areas, managers are, a dime a dozen, whichever corporation or organization you've got. Small counties are a little different, and most everybody ekes out a living. And so, I'm just trying to remember what my salary was when I went there. I think it was in the 30s, 30,000. I think I took a 50% pay cut. I think I was paid 60 something as a department head in Naples, and I went to work as a manager for 30 something.
And you're there 10 years?
No, Suwannee 2.
Oh, 2.
Yeah. And like I said, so that's when I got involved in FCCMA. That's when I went to the conference, played in a golf tournament. Jim Cook, helping Okaloosa. He said, you should apply. And I applied, and I don't know how the hell I got the job. I had 2 years under my belt at Suwannee. But a guy named Ray Sansom, who was the chairman of the county commission at the time, and became a good friend. And we won't go into Ray, but he was Speaker of the House at one point. And he took it upon himself to make sure that he got the right person. He spent a couple of days in Suwannee going around talking to people. That's rare. An elected official from one community goes and does his research in the other community. So I was happy in Okaloosa, and then Bob Neighbors, decides that I need to apply for this job when it opened up at FAC, and I was happy as I could be over in Okaloosa and really wasn't looking for work. And if you recall, FAC was going through kind of a difficult time. Some of the members were arguing with each other, and I think a few of the smaller counties had kind of pulled out of the association. And it's there's strength in numbers.
I think Suwannee might have been one of the
there's strength in numbers.
Angry ones.
You have to stay together. Counties will live or die together, and so that was. I was pretty emotional about, you can't do this. You have to stay together. We'll solve whatever the problems are, but we got this battle coming at us where Charlie, Chris, and others wanted to just cut our revenue stream in half and see if we could survive. It was crazy what was going on. So, and all, in my opinion, for political gains, in my opinion. If you remember, we had to hire Hank Fishkind and do all sorts of economic analysis. Okay, if you cut here, you lose this and this. If you cut here, you lose this. And at some point we get to where, there just aren't services. And this is, to me, the local government. I know the state does important stuff, okay, but what residents care about, public safety, health, safety, welfare. And so all of that, county government does. And, you have to fund it. And so, anyway, on to Okaloosa. 2 years in Suwannee. Okaloosa, 13, I think. 93 to 2005, 12.
Yeah.
And then here.
The rest is history.
Here for 10. And I enjoyed the policy side of it. Was I've never told you this. I didn't come here most of what FAC had prior to me was lobbyists. There's hundreds of them in this town. And probably the most important function FAC does is lobby for county's interest, which is, based on what we've talked about, pretty important stuff. And we've done a lot of great things with the state. There have been good bills passed and all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting. It was. I know y'all tried to keep me out of the Capitol, which was probably smart because I'm not a good lobbyist.
It's not true.
It is true. It is true. I don't mince words. If I talk to somebody, I tell them my opinion and ask for theirs and point out where we think we're off base and how do we get together. And but I don't do it very delicately, and it requires sometimes some delicacy. There's some big egos and big personalities in the Capitol, and I'm not good at.
You saw them this week.
I'm not good at that, so I've never felt good at that. But I think I was good at what I'd done as a manager, managing resources, building a good team. I'm proud of the folks that some of them still here, some of them have gone on and done other things. Saw some of them last night, Susan and stuff. Some people that were great lobbyists, and we trained them and prepared them, and they've done bigger and better things. So, but having a good team here is important. And I think we had good leadership along the way. I always didn't want to get involved in the members' election of the leaders of the. I think past execs had gotten more involved in kind of handpicking people, and I felt if a commissioner wanted to offer themselves up for leadership, then have at it. If I'd explain to them, what the issues were and were they capable of really dealing with everything. But I think we had some turnover, which you always have with electeds, and I think we kept an immediate past president. Susan Latvala might have served 5 terms as immediate past president because of folks ahead of her or behind her, I guess, dropped off for whatever reason or another. But I enjoyed the 10 years. But after 10 years, I'd given it my best shot, and I felt I left at the right time. Ginger's done a great job.
Well, you're still giving. You're giving today. So.
There you go.
The one thing I wanted to ask you, I was talking with Commissioner Meeks earlier today, and he was just talking about the relationship that he has with his county coordinator and how important it is in the trust. So I was going to ask, when you have a new commissioner that gets elected and they go from campaigning to the governing role, how did you work to kind of acclimate them into everything they need to know?
Very important. Very important. So to answer your question directly, I made sure that we had briefings set up with each department head, with each commissioner, and we dig as deep as they want to dig. Now, there's always a line. They have to understand. We all have to understand our role. I don't vote on policy, and you don't tell me who to hire and fire. And if you're coming in as a new commissioner and you've got a list of names that you want off the payroll or something, then we're not going to have a very long conversation. If you want to run me off, then that's fine. But to get to them, you got to go through me, and those are very frank conversations. Now, if you got issues, development issues, or we're not providing a level of service that you think we should be, and we need to get better. I'm all ears and all on board for trying to fix things that might be broken. But they hear a lot on the campaign trail, some of it true and maybe some of it not so true. So a lot of electeds come in, wanting to charge the hill and solve problems and all that. And having fresh ideas and energy is a good thing. I always tell them it takes 3 votes. If there's a 5-member commission, you can't do anything without 3 votes. So keep that in mind. Do not alienate your fellow commissioners. You're going to want their vote on something that's important to you one day. So build the trust and relationship among the people on your commission so that your ideas will be heard and listened to, and you will get support to do what you think is best for the community. But yes, having them as quickly as possible up to speed. I mean quickly, because they get elected and they may have a commission meeting within a day or two. They have to get sworn in, and a lot of times they sit down in that chair and have to vote on things that they don't know anything about. And so quickly, and you're talking about depending on how many new ones that you have. I mean, fortunately, all 5 don't go at once. It's either 2 or 3, depending on the cycle. But you have to quickly acclimate them to the job. I mean, there are, in fact, does a good job. I think there's historically right after Election Day, and maybe it's not this one, but it's the winter legislative conference. It's right after the election, and you have a new commissioner orientation. I tried to make sure that my commissioners went to that. Chapter 125 outlines the responsibilities of the manager. If they have a manager form, then they need to understand the duties and responsibilities of the manager as quickly as possible. So I think it's all hands on deck for new commissioners to educate them. I always told them to get in the commissioner certification program as quickly as possible and go as far as they wanted to go with it. Not just the classes that y'all teach, but going to a meeting and talking to commissioners that have been doing it for, 4, 5, 10, whatever years. The peer-to-peer, you can't talk because of sunshine laws. You can't really talk to your fellow commissioners for fear that someone's going to accuse you of talking about stuff you're going to vote on, which a lot of times you're just trying to get a feel for things. So going to a meeting where you can talk to your commissioners from the neighboring county or the region or statewide, I think is very helpful as well. So huge learning curve. I'm sure you talk to commissioners about that learning curve and the challenges for it. But very important I had an open door policy. I'd walk down to the commission offices every day, walk the hall, see who was in the office, sit down, chat for a half hour. Every time there was a commission meeting, the agendas went out a week in advance. You want however much time you want to ask questions about what's on the agenda before the meeting. I'm here for you. You want them prepared when they go in there. You want them to ask as many questions as you can. Makes for a much smoother commission meeting. And I think every commission should be able to meet for 2 or 3 hours in the morning on a Tuesday or in the evening and get their business done. These commissions that meet for days and nights and days, somebody's not prepping people right, or we're digging too deep, or something's wrong. Because, if everything's running smoothly, because you only have so much energy you can put into a meeting. If you're sitting there for 8 hours, by the end of the day, your brain's not really working real well. And everybody's tired. When they get tired, they get cranky. Mm-hmm. So and hungry. So I tried to make sure our meetings could be done in a half a day, whatever that was.
And not too late at night.
And not too late at night. And there are workshops, and don't try to workshop an item in the middle of a commission meeting.
No.
If an item needs to be workshopped, then hold a workshop. You can't vote on anything, but you can just exchange a lot of information and be prepared to vote on something. If it's too big and too complicated, then workshop it. Don't try to run it through a commission meeting and cross your fingers and hope. That's when it deteriorates. It turns into an 8-hour meeting, or the issue goes down the tubes, and sometimes important stuff gets delayed getting done because there wasn't enough prep done. My opinion.
Good advice. I got it all down. Do you know we've been going for almost an hour?
Didn't know that.
Well, let's wrap this up. Chris, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate your time, especially knowing that 1, you're retired, and 2, you have several grandchildren that you love to spend time with. I also really want to thank you for all the volunteer work you do for ICG and our ongoing education programs. Your involvement with all your experience adds tremendous value to what we're doing at ICG. And finally, and I mean this, you really should write a book. Thank you again, and I know we'll talk again soon. Take care.